Hi everyone, and thanks for joining me on our video lesson based on ELL students, English language learners. So before I get into any content, I'm going to actually have you do an activity to get you thinking about the English language in general. So I'm going to hold something up in a minute. It's a short paragraph. I want you to whisper read it to yourself and really be conscious of what is going on in your mind while you're reading this. And in a minute we'll talk about it. So here it is, very short, and just kind of read it to yourself. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. If you're anything like me, then in that second sentence where it said they saw Henry making a, how many of you said bow? I did. And the reason why most people say bow is because of background knowledge. If you go to the sentence, the previous sentence, it talks about arrows. And when we think about arrows, we think about bows. We don't necessarily think about bows. So it only makes sense to make that connection in our head. And that connection was pretty unconscious, but it happens anyway just because of our schema. And then the next sentence where it says, she had tears in her dress. How many of you said that, right? Well, it's obviously not tears in her dress. But the reason why most people say tears is because, again, the sentence before is talking about a little girl. When you think about a little girl, the first thing you think about is probably tears and not tears. The two just don't go together quite as neatly. And then if you continue reading where it says, read to the boys or read to the boys, most of you probably just started by saying read to the boys because it is uncommon in English, although grammatically sound, it's uncommon to start with the past tense of reading, to start a sentence that way. But grammatically it's fine. So we probably had to kind of self-correct that as we were reading. And then how many of you in the next sentence said after a minute? Again, that is based on what is more common in our language. After a minute is much more common than after a minute. Minute is a word we don't typically use on a day-to-day basis. And then the last sentence, that was probably for me the trickiest because for the longest time I kept saying that has to say does. And I said, does work? That doesn't make any sense. So it's doze, right? Doze, we're standing. But again, how many times do we use the word doze? And how many times do we start a sentence with the word doze? So much more common to start with does. So what does this prove? Obviously, this paragraph was created to show people the uniqueness, the challenge, the confusion that can come with the English language. And you and I know the English language pretty well. So even we struggled with that passage. But the English language, as you know, does not follow normal conventions. There's probably more exceptions than there are rules. So it's a very challenging and difficult language to acquire. So going back to the ELL English language learners that you will come across in your classroom, you can kind of categorize them into 3 different categories. And I'm going to share with you some real students. So David, there's David, and he was born in Mexico, as were his parents, and he attended half of the 1st grade in Mexico. Now David just moved to New Jersey to finish the year and he speaks no English. So when you think of ELL students, that's probably what you're most commonly thinking about students that are not from this country and who speak no English. But then we have another student, Lillian, who is a little bit different. So Lillian was born in the US and her parents were as well. Her family lived in the Chinatown section of New York City. Both of her parents worked in Chinatown and speak no English. Lillian's family recently moved to New Jersey so she can start kindergarten in a better school district. So, interestingly enough, even though Lillian's parents were born here and she was born here, she's in the same boat with David, right? Because she has limited or perhaps no experience with the English language. So even though their experiences are quite different, they are very much the same when it comes to language. And then we have Jodrick, who again is different from the first two. He attended schools for 2 years in the US so far, and he consistently has struggled with reading and writing. His family comes from the Republic of Cameroon in Africa, and although he speaks English, it's not standard English and would be considered Cameroonian Pidgin English, which is like Creole. So if you've ever heard the Creole language, it is, yes, it is English, but it's not standard English. So based on that, and perhaps based on other things, Jodrick is struggling in his language arts classes. So those are the 3 types of students that you might come across in your classroom that would be considered ELL. So you have students that are not from this country and have just immigrated here, and because of that speak no English. And then you have students that have lived here all their life. Their parents may have lived here all their life, but again, because of the community that they were raised in, the home that they were raised in, speak no English. And then you have the third student who maybe speaks a different dialect of English, or because of the first 2 factors that I just said. So no English is spoken in the home, or has immigrated here, is struggling with literacy. So that's the bottom line. Language, the acquisition of the English language is holding a student back from finding success with literacy. So that would be kind of the 3 categories of English language learners that you may come across in your classroom. So speaking of acquisition of the English language or any language, there are really 2 processes that go on simultaneously, and you'll find that your ELL students will probably favor one process over the other process, but really what you're aiming for is a balance of these 2 processes so that they can be successful acquiring English. So I'm going to show you this real quick, and I'm not going to read from it, but here are the 2 processes. So we have the acquired system and the learned system. The acquired system is really language in its natural conversational form. So any of you that know another language know that the best way to learn a language is to immerse yourself in that country and that culture's language. And that's really, studies have proven the best way that you can acquire a language. And it's mainly spoken word, and it doesn't always follow the correct grammar rules. And then you have the other process, which is the learn process. And that is the more formal, standard English rules, convention, grammar, punctuation, verb tenses, subject agreement, all of that stuff. So, you may have a student that is so fearful of making a mistake with his or her spoken language, she's trying to get it just perfect grammatically, that she may not actually do a lot of talking in your class because she's trying to work it out in her head, what would sound right, what is grammatically correct. And she's kind of too much in that learned process. And then you may have a student who could really care less about the functions of grammar and is relying far too much on the acquired system. And but what you really want is to kind of strike that perfect balance. And one way you can do that is by creating a classroom that is safe for your ELL students to take a risk, and lots of opportunities for them to read aloud, read their own work aloud, and have discussions with other students, native English speakers, as well as other ELL students in your class.